Welcome to part 3 of our Moving Your Medical Careers to Australia podcasts. Today we're going to be talking about all things English tests, a very sought after topic. I'm Dr. Sasha from Koji Australia, where we help people to revive, survive and thrive in their medical careers. Hi guys, so today on this podcast we will be discussing the English test and the different versions and our experiences with it. And we have a really special guest here today, one of our colleagues and one of my friends, Brendan.
Hi, Sash.
Hi.
Thanks very much for having me.
No worries.
It's an honor being here.
Awesome. Do you want to tell the listeners about you?
Cool. So my name's Dr. Brendan. I'm from South Africa, and I relocated to Australia in December 2020 amidst our COVID level 2. Yes, I was fortunate enough to have an employment opportunity in one of the states in Australia. I relocated. I stayed in that hospital. It was a regional hospital. Stayed there for about a year, and then I relocated to another regional hospital afterwards.
Awesome. So Brendan and I actually worked together a little bit in South Africa, in East London.
Our paths are entwined.
Our paths have crossed, and Brendan is very knowledgeable. He's quite a senior doctor, much more senior than me. He's taught me a lot actually throughout my career. A lot of the skills and knowledge I have, he works particularly in ICU, but spends a lot of time in ED in
Correct,
Australia.
yes. Correct.
Currently works in ICU as a registrar and starting some training this year.
Hopefully. I've
Yeah.
applied to the college. We'll see what happens.
Yep.
That answers will come in about maybe November, December this year.
Yep. Well, that's where I met Brendan at home in an ICU that he was working in, and he's taught me a lot of skills and a lot of knowledge, and yep, he's really got some very good insights.
Thanks, Sash. It's been an honor.
So looking forward to discussing all these options with you and giving people some information about the English test.
Perfect.
So I know it's probably going to confuse people as to why we are talking about this, because we are English-speaking people. I am a first language English speaker, and you as well.
Yes.
And coming from South Africa, there are a lot of people that speak English as their first language or speak English really well even as a second language. However, we are not exempt from the English test. We count as a non-English speaking country for
correct.
Australia and APRA purposes.
Unfortunately, but that's true.
So we have a unique situation where we are able to compare the two tests that we've done. We've done two separate types of tests. I've done the TOEFL or the TOEFL test, and Brendan has done IELTS.
Correct, yes.
So that's
IELTS.
Perfect. Okay. So we'll be discussing those two tests. Obviously, there are some other options that are mentioned on the APRA website, like OET, which I'll discuss a little bit further later. And there are actually exemptions to these English tests, so not everyone has to do them. Caroline will go into that as well. But for these purposes, we'll be chatting just about these two and our experiences with it, maybe a few tips on how we prepared, and then maybe give you guys a better idea of the outline of each test and which one you would probably be more suited to do. So, Bren, let's start with yours, with the IELTS. So how much was it roundabout?
Offhand, I remember I did it in 2018 and 2019. It was roughly around about maybe $200 or so, ballpark figure. It might have gone up a bit, maybe to $300.
Yeah, I think from what I've read now, it's sitting at around $250. And I think that's US dollars, not even Australian. The TOEFL is cheaper.
Yes.
It was, when I did it a couple years back, around about $150, and I think it's around $180 now.
Okay.
So just in the price point, TOEFL is just more economical in price.
And I can understand why, when we go down further, of what is indicated to actually help out with making those exams profitable, but also in the sense of how they actually are laid out and styled. As you'll then see, one's going to be more human-based, person-based, and other one's more online.
Yep. So TOEFL stands for Test of English Language as a Foreign Language. And IELTS stands for International English Language Testing System, correct?
Correct.
Right. So TOEFL lasts for 2 years, and this is for registration purposes. but does last for 3 years when we talk about visa and PR purposes. So in the Department of Home Affairs, it would be lasting for 3 years.
Yes, and I think that's also the same for IELTS as well.
Yes,
2
exactly.
years
the
for
same.
registration, 3 for immigration purposes.
Great. So in that regard, they're pretty much equal. And I think most of these English tests are actually standardized to be
I think so.
this.
Would be fair to say.
It would be terrible to have to redo this just for an administrative thing. So I think the timing of these tests really important as well.
Yes.
And obviously you'd need it for your job and for registration. But if you are thinking of converting visas to PR, or if you're not going to just be doing a short year or two stint in Australia and you want to stay permanently, you might want to think of also just getting on top of the PR application and to use the same test.
Very true.
Because you would have to redo it.
Yeah, I've done that myself as well, so I had to get on top of it before it expired. And so it was fortunate that the immigrations officers saw it for 3 years.
Yep. So, Brendan, you'd say you speak really good English?
I like to say that I do, but the test said otherwise.
I would say it's pretty good. It's not as good as mine.
Okay, yeah, fair judgment.
You can tell,
fair judgment.
you know, what part of South Africa you are from and what part I'm from. It's just evident.
Well, one would be the cultural capital and the other one would be the financial capital.
So, full disclosure, I passed first time. Brendan has had to do this test twice.
Yes, I had to do it twice.
You did He did the IELTS twice.
Twice. I had to drain it out my pockets as well.
Yeah, so it's
Dig
2
deep.
times $250.
Yes, yes, at a South African exchange rate.
It's not good. That's a lot of hours of work.
So the stories behind those is that firstly, in I think it was 2018, I was applying to Irish registration, and
You were planning to go to Ireland before
So I was planning just to have it as a backup, as an option, and you know,
An
if
option,
ever.
most South Africans kind of like play around with that idea.
Yes.
Even I
Yes, we
toyed
all.
with
I
that
think
idea.
A lot of people do, and you know, Irish registration is one of the most easiest and probably the most expedient way for a South African doctor to go. So in 2018, I was exploring that route, and then you know they said, okay, well, I have to have an English exam as well, because they didn't view South Africa as a first speaking language in English. So it was interesting though that their band scoring for the average had to be 7, but yet they would allow each individual section to score 6.5. So
okay. So you could average it out. So
Yes.
you could do poorly in one, very well in other, and then
Correct.
just average it out to 7.
yeah,
Yep.
so you just had to meet those certain criteria which they had.
We'll discuss the scoring as well a bit later.
Yeah.
Hey.
So that's maybe my excuse why I had to write it twice.
Oh, I see. You were not aiming for the high bandwidths of Australia.
Yes.
Let's just go with that then.
A pass is a pass if it's by an inch or by a mile. But unfortunately, when it goes
If you're not
towards
first,
Australia,
you're last.
yes.
Okay. So Brendan's done it twice. I've done it once. That's also quite a I don't know, good difference and a unique perspective to have because you've done it twice. So, you know, we can discuss that, the pros and cons of that as well. So let's just go into a little bit of the, you know, just the pure facts about the tests. So TOEFL has about 4,500 testing centers worldwide. It's a lot.
Yeah.
IELTS is a lot less. It's
Correct.
Just over 1,000, I think 1,200 or so testing centers all over. However, even though it's a fewer testing centers, it is still widely available. I mean, it was available in South Africa.
Yeah, it was.
Whereas AMCs weren't available in South Africa.
Very true.
Yep. So
Very true.
So it is quite widely available. One of the big differences is that TOEFL is an IBT, which is an internet-based test. So it's a computer test, and yours was written. Correct?
Yes, it was in person. So everything,
person,
we had to
yeah.
actually go to a center, sit there with a couple of people. And so it was actually available in most of the big metropolitan areas, but not in the smaller regional areas of South Africa.
So you didn't use a computer at all?
No.
Okay, so whether you do the TOEFL, and I know this was an option during COVID, I would have to have a look if it's still an option, but you could do the TOEFL at home as well, which is what we had to do because of the pandemic. But even if you don't do it at home, you still go to a testing center and it's still computer-based and internet-based. So that's a huge difference between the two.
It's a nice advantage, I think, because it does provide a lot of flexibility for someone. And I mean, you know, it's a lot more accessible, it being over 3,000 more stations than the IELTS. So
Yes, so exactly. So it's more accessible in terms of testing centers and also being internet based, it's just so much easier that's why they can just roll it out.
Correct.
However, not everyone would be proficient in using a computer.
Yes,
to that extent.
You have to be computer literate.
Yes, exactly.
So you actually, I think, have to know your strengths and your weaknesses and how you're able to perform in front of a computer screen.
Yep. So
instead of being in person.
Exactly. So I've mentioned in a lot of podcasts before this that having computer access or working with computers on a daily basis is actually not just what everyone experiences. Like in here in Australia, we use computers every single day, where in South Africa, we weren't having that exposure every single day. So if you just didn't have a high quality laptop at home that you played on all the time, you wouldn't necessarily, even as a very highly educated, tertiary educated person, have very good computer literacy skills. So that is something to consider.
Especially when you have to be doing your writing section. For the IELTS, we could write in hand, but yet on your TOEFL, you actually have to type it out.
Very true. I didn't even actually consider that.
You actually then have to think, okay, how many words can I type per minute? And can I hit that benchmark?
Exactly.
In whatever span of time or so.
And if I'm not mistaken, the TOEFL, where you would type it, the essay writing time is less than IELTS. Because I think it's 50 minutes and the IELTS one is about an hour.
Yes.
So that's something to consider. I didn't think of that. Oh, I didn't think of that. I was quite happy with my computer literacy, so I was fine with that. But that is something to definitely consider.
Something that people actually have to realize.
100%, definitely. Yep. So that's one of the main differences: the paper-based and the internet-based. Another thing that is quite different is the structure of the questions. So
Correct.
TOEFL is MCQ-based with an essay at the end when they're testing the writing component, whereas IELTS is written answers.
Yes, it is written answers.
And a written essay.
Written essay as well. So the listening test and also the reading test, you'd actually then have to either write down certain answers. Either then they give you a diagram and then you have to then say, okay, Johnny goes through this shopping mall and then turns right, and you actually have to write down certain things. With the listening as well, they'll then say, okay, they give you a sentence or so, and you actually then have to describe how many maybe animals were in the park or so, and which ones, and then you have to write down all of them. So you actually have to rely on memory.
Yep, it's quite similar. It sounds very similar to TOEFL in the sense that we would also get things, parts to listen to, get played to us, but you would get multiple choice questions. So even if you had sort of, couldn't remember exactly what you had heard, you might recognize it if you see it again.
True.
Which I think is quite a big advantage.
It is. And I think the downside with IELTS is also your handwriting. If the examiners can't read your handwriting, they will then mark it incorrect. And they're quite specific about that.
That's probably why you failed, let's be honest.
Yes. It's not because of my beautiful English.
No. So that's true. I do think, though, the MCQ questions can be tough for some people.
I think so.
It's a strategic way of answering tests. It's not for everyone.
No,
some people hate having to do MCQ. Some people like to be able to express their point in their own words.
Yes.
So that's something to consider. If you hate MCQ questions, TOEFL's not for you. The whole thing is MCQ based. True. Both of these tests are extremely long. They take pretty much the whole day with a little break in between. And it is exhausting. I remember feeling exhausted after writing.
It is. It was tiring. I mean, we started at 8 o'clock in the morning. We did our reading, our listening, and our writing test until maybe midday. And then just had a 30-minute break.
Yep.
And then went to our speaking one afterwards.
TOEFL's pretty similar. I think it almost exactly like that. And so just to break down how they test your English skills, for both of these tests, and I think this is quite, I might be mistaken, but this is quite standard across most of the English testing platforms. So they would test 4 domains: reading, listening, speaking, and writing. And the writing is usually in the form of 2 essays.
Correct.
Yeah. And the topics can vary, and you'll find out on the day. So the big difference with the scoring systems, so with TOEFL, there was a total score of 120 marks available, each of the domains being out of 30 points. Now, there are different bandwidths for points in both of these tests, and you have to get over a certain bandwidth to have your English skills recognized for the medical profession.
Correct.
For TOEFL, it was to meet their advanced English bandwidths, which I'll go into in a minute. Then with IELTS, they test the 4 domains, the same ones.
Yeah, same ones.
However, it's not out of a total of 120. There's no total score.
No, there was individual scores scoring from 1 to 9.
So each domain is scored from 1 to 9.
Correct.
Okay.
And then the band score, the average score, from an Australian perspective, needed to be above 7, as compared to the Irish standard, it was 6.5. Well, both of them was actually 7, but yet Australia required you to actually score above 7 in each category as well.
So what you're saying is Australia just wanted you to be proficient in each one instead of sucking at the one and being good at the other.
Yes.
Which one did you fail? Out of interest.
It was the written one. Yeah, it was the written component. So I got 6.5 for my first attempt. So that was good enough for Ireland, but then I had to then get 7 for Australia. So I did that in the second one. Yes, it was a 0.5 difference.
Oh, terrible.
0.5 difference costed me another $250.
Shocking. Okay, so it's out of 9 IELTS,
Yes.
out of 9, average of 7 across all
Correct.
4 domains, and above 7 for each.
Correct.
So you really have no room for error.
No.
You either have to get 7 or above.
Yes.
You can't get 6 and compensate with another, as you've clearly shown. So they really don't even have to have that average of 7. They just need to say get 7 above for all of them.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then with TOEFL, so I've already said it's out of 120. Each one is 30, but you do have to get, it's not about your score out of 120. You have to get over a certain mark for each domain to be classified as advanced English. So for reading, it needs to be more than 24 out of 30. For listening, more than 22 out of 30. And speaking, more than 25 out of 30. And writing, more than 24 out of 30. I found it quite interesting that the domains weren't equal.
Yes.
Don't you find that interesting?
Yes. And
whereas with IELTS, they are.
Yes. So I think it's just your standardization of your tests and what's accepted. But it is interesting that one examination would then say, fine, they put more weight on one aspect of the or another.
And that's pretty important if you're considering between the 2 tests which one to take. Say you are stronger in your speaking, but maybe weaker in listening and responding, then TOEFL might be for you because you can be weaker in, say, listening, which is 22. Something to consider as well. Yes. Where IELTS will want you to, your listening and your speaking and your writing to all be of the same standard.
Correct.
Which is really interesting. Did you finish yours?
So yes, yeah. So they give you a certain. So basically, the reading, the listening, and the writing was all in a big group together, and there was a specific time. So I was fortunate to finish all of them, and then afterwards, after the break, then we do a recorded session for the speaking.
Okay, so I finished mine as well. I was pressured though.
It was the pressure I think came from with the writing, even on my part. We had to do 2 essays, and there was a time limit and a word attainment that we had to do.
So we both agree the reading was it was almost like reading comprehension at school, right?
Yes.
It was like a passage.
Yes.
And then you would answer questions on the passage.
Correct.
My questions would be MCQs, where yours would be written question.
Down.
I've also had a look online, and it's actually said that the passages that are given between IELTS and TOEFL would be like more newspaper articles or sort of daily written passages that you would come across, whereas IELTS is more like academic passages.
Yes. So it goes back to what level of testing you're needing. For medicine perspectives, you needed advanced English. So the difference would then come in with what types of essays or what type of readings you'd actually be presented with.
I see.
So in the advanced section, you would be given actual papers. I remember the one was statistical graphs as well. And you actually had to have a broad sense of general knowledge. One of them was, they showed us a graph where the economy was tanking in 2008. And you actually had to mention that there was the financial recession in America with the housing, to actually make your argument and also your insight a lot more acceptable.
See, I find that crazy because I would have probably done very poorly in something like that. Yeah. So I remember our reading one was a passage on, like, from a newspaper article about someone that had gone missing on a bicycle.
Okay.
So it was really not an academic piece, yet everyone is being given that piece,
Yes.
and based on how well you do on it, that's how you get classified as being
Okay.
advanced or not.
Right.
Do you understand what I mean?
I see. Because our readings we actually had academic articles.
Yeah, so that's one of the big differences that I hear people talking about all the time, is that the TOEFL is more sort of conversational topics and everyday
Yes.
reading, where
IELTS
IELTS is very academic. So that's a sore point for a lot of people. I mean,
Yeah.
even as an English speaker,
No, true.
reader.
And I think, again, it boils down to you just need to know your strengths and then, go window shop at each of these tests to actually see which one you think you'll be able to do the best in.
So then for listening, let's chat about the listening. So we had a recording of someone speaking, reading out something. One was an advert, I think, advertisement of some sort, with some questions afterwards. Also multiple choice questions. Did you have an actual person talking to you?
No, so we had pretty much similar. So us sitting in the big room, and then they played it from a recording on a radio or so. And it was through a CD, and they would then talk for about maybe 2 minutes, and then we had to then answer certain questions from that certain passage.
Did you take notes?
You could, but yet, it all depends if you then are able to multitask.
Yeah, and you
To
also
listen and
don't
take
know what
note.
they're going to ask.
No,
So
you don't.
I try to take notes. Like, I try to write down pertinent points that were being brought up, that, if it was a fact or a time or a place, they might ask that. So I would try
Yes.
write it down. But most of the time I found it really difficult to do two things at once. And
Because you had to really listen attentively. I remember, I think, between the 2 times that I've gone, one was like giving directions, and the other one was actually explaining what someone has done during their day. And, we had to then actually
ours were very
recall.
similar. That was very similar. Yes, I found that very difficult. But again, I had MCQ based questions,
Yes.
and you would have had to remember
Yeah,
all of that.
we just
out
had
of
to
your
then
head.
just write then the answer on question A, write the answer B,
Yeah, crazy.
and make sure your handwriting is legible.
And then speaking as well. So the next domain would be speaking, and
Correct.
we had to speak into the obviously mic of the computer,
Yes.
and sort of make a voice memo, a voice recording, and then I suppose that's what they would assess, and they would ask us. They obviously gave us a topic to talk on, and
Yes.
you were speaking to an actual person.
Yes. So we were in a room. Then there was a little recorder there, and then the person would then start with just basic, questions about you yourself. Date of birth, where do you come from, where did you school, and eventually then the questions become a lot more topical about your opinion about current political issues, or some cultural aspects.
Okay.
And so you can get quite in depth in your explanations that you give, but it was face to face to that person.
I think speaking is one of the areas where, if you are English speaking and you're doing this test, this is where you just really shine. It comes very naturally to just
It does.
speak, and it's where the examiners, I think, can pick up really quickly that you're competent in English. I think where our downfalls are is the essay writing,
Yes.
and I think honestly the listening.
It is, the essay writing, for IELTS or so, there was, when you go onto the website and when you've then subscribed or so, they actually give you certain, tips on what to do for listening and writing. And they, even for the speaking, they don't want you to be using certain jargon and certain slang.
Yep.
And, they don't want you to be using the words, are.
Yes.
So they actually, tell you this is what we're expecting.
And I think that they only record for a certain amount of time. Well, for us, when we were speaking, they gave us a certain amount of time to record, like 30 seconds or so.
Yes.
So you actually had to get your point across well in
Quite
that
quickly.
30 seconds. So if you filled it with and
Yeah.
then
It would not work in your
it
favor.
wouldn't work. No.
Yeah, for us, it was a continuous recording. I think the interview was about maybe 2 to 5 minutes, if I could
That's
recall.
pretty nice. So because ours was done definitely in little bursts, which is I found that hard.
Yeah.
To get my point across
I
very
mean,
quickly and clearly.
True. And especially when it has to be spontaneous.
And then the essay writing, I mean, we've gone over that. That's pretty much like how essay writing was at school, where they give you 2 topics and it's like a school exam. Give you some
Yes.
topics or something controversial to talk about.
Exactly.
And then you just write 2
Yes.
pieces of writing. They gave you a word count. I can't remember offhand how long mine was. But
Exactly.
yeah, that was probably the biggest time pressured area for me, but I still finished. And
Yeah. Also, time pressured for me too. I fortunately finished. That's the one that I got different between the 2 attempts that I did. And also, again, it was an academic articles that you had to interpret. with graphs or statistics or
Crazy.
numbers that they actually gave you.
I think we had something on like a historical piece, like a bit of, they were talking about some prehistoric dinosaur history type article.
Very nice.
Yeah. And it was actually, I quite enjoyed the essays.
You know, you're paying so much money, you might as well enjoy the moments.
Yeah. Okay, so we've already mentioned once or twice that you've done this twice.
Yes.
So my question is, why would you have, if you didn't pass it the first time, why did you do IELTS again? Why wouldn't you have tried TOEFL
True.
or OET or something else?
I think it was, firstly, I was very familiar with IELTS going around the second time. I knew that I had to now get a higher score, and I was familiar with the layouts. And so I knew, fine, I'll have to just, give them what they need. And also it would then require maybe a bit less preparation because I've already prepared first and for the first attempt. Again, also, time-wise, I never really had enough time to then explore other opportunities, to go in depth to see what was the other options. And yeah, so I just went with that and hope for the best, really, from there.
I think that makes sense.
At that point in time, I think that was the most important thing that I could do, given the situations or so.
I think I'd probably have done the same thing, just because the preparation for each of these tests is a little different. And I don't know how you prepared. I was very confused as to how to prepare for like an English test in a language that I only know. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's not like you have to learn English again.
Yeah, no, true.
So you just, it's more tactical and structuring of how the test would be that I was looking into.
Yeah.
And I used YouTube videos for most of them. How did you prepare?
My preparation was, they had resources on the IELTS website once you've actually paid and stuff. There was also the options of purchasing more material through them. And I think if you aren't adept in English language, or if English is your second language, having certain preparations going through or certain classes would maybe be in your favor.
Like a courses
or so, or what they would offer online, or what you did through YouTube. I mean, there's a lot of resources freely available now. And also, I think, just practice reading, and, you have to submerge yourself in that language. So reading books, even just it would be fictional books, conversing to people online or speaking to people in English, watching English television, so you could try and recall and just, hone in on your listening skills. Those
point.
are your soft touches. I think, for myself and you, it might have been relatively simple to actually pass these exams. But if you are coming from a place whereby English isn't your first language, and, I've actually worked with a lot of IMGs where their English is not their first language, and they've had a lot of difficulties. And for them, passing an English exam was quite a big step.
Huge step. I actually felt like a big step for me as well. It's a daunting thing. Even as an English speaker. So I think these are very challenging tests, and the more help, the better. The more preparation, the better. So there are a lot of pros and cons to each of these, I suppose. I do feel that I'm happy with my choice, just because I can't be unhappy with it. I passed it the first time.
Correct.
But just from what I'm hearing, it does sound like TOEFL might be a more fair way, I suppose, to assess someone in a sort of more informal English way, but even at an advanced level.
It does appear so, and I think it might be a more simpler approach and a more readily accessible approach. And also, let's be honest, it's a cheaper option.
It is cheaper, and it's more widely available.
Yes.
It's computer-based as well. You also don't have the daunting feeling of having to do this in front of a real person. But some people like that. Some people want to be seen and heard by a real person. And so some people that might appeal to some people with IELTS. I also think that the TOEFL is a USA-based, it's a US-based test. It's based on US English, definitely.
Okay. Because IELTS is British-based.
Yes, exactly.
So, it's...
So that might impact your speaking one. So if you've learned your English from TV or series...
Well, true. And also you have to ask your country that you're coming from, what is their English structure based on? Is it based British English, or is it American English?
Exactly. So I think Australia's nice in the sense that I don't think they can really decide whether they
Very true.
UK or US English.
Because just coming to mind, when you actually have to write your answers down in IELTS, they even look at spelling. And British spelling and American spelling is different.
It's totally different. Yep. So that's something to consider as well.
Yes.
So and I know that for a fact TOEFL is US based and IELTS is UK based.
Yes.
So it will make a huge difference in firstly where your English is coming from. And from South Africa, ours is UK based.
Yes, it's UK based.
So you would think that it would be a bit easier for us to do IELTS, but I know a lot of people that have found it very difficult. So I think it's just the structure of IELTS, to be honest.
It might just be easier on the second time.
Yeah, so don't be despondent if you had to do it twice.
Don't give up. I mean, like if you've decided that you want to be making a move and chasing an opportunity, don't give up.
At the end of the day, I think they each bring different things to the table.
They do.
I think neither one is probably easy. They're both pretty tough.
Yes.
They are assessed a little differently, but they each have their pros and cons. I think IELTS is probably more famous.
I think so. That was the one that I always knew of.
Exactly. TOEFL is kind of like the underdog, and IELTS is probably more widely acceptable worldwide. So if you weren't honing in on Australia, you'd probably want to do something that sets casts a wider net for you. But if you are just zoning in on Australia, you'd want to do the one that suits you the best. And
yeah, true.
so that's why I just went for the other option. And it was COVID, the pandemic. I was not able to, they weren't offering IELTS at the time, so I had to look for another option. So yeah, they both have their pros and cons. I suppose it's just about what suits the individual, and from hearing these experiences, which one you kind of resonate with more.
Definite.
But it's just, they're all just a means to an end. I mean, everyone gets there eventually, whether you have to do it once or twice. I know people that have had to do TOEFL twice, and just how you feel on the day, or what questions you had to get, or if you ran out of time or not. So it doesn't, you can hear Brendan's English is perfect.
Well,
perfect.
It's a 0.5 difference of being perfect.
It's perfect English. Yet you can have to do it a second time. And that's true with all of these assessments to even try to get to Australia.
Exactly.
It's not always based on how smart you are, how good your English is, how qualified you are.
Very true.
It's all just strategic
and
tactical.
How you actually answer the questions.
Exactly. It's all playing the game, really. So you get there eventually.
True.
Once, twice, whether you do this test, that test, it's just it's a little bump that you have to at the end of the day just go through with it and get it over and done with. I would say though, try and time it so you only have to do it once.
That's the timing. I think you have to realize, fine, it's going to be valid for 2 years. When will be the correct time? And also factor in, if you're going to be applying for a job or your visa, you have to ensure that you can execute it and pass it, and to satisfy then the time's constraints.
So I think that's all from me for TOEFL. Do you have anything else for IELTS that you'd want to tell people? No?
I don't really have anything else for the IELTS or
no,
so.
It is what it is,
And
4 domains, English.
If you have time, go venture and actually explore each option, each different testing, and see which one really applies to you and how you can apply your strengths to actually pass the exams.
Yeah, well, thanks, Brendan. Thanks so much for taking the time to chat about it.
No, it's only a pleasure. Really great to be here.
Awesome. I'll be going through a few more of the English options, obviously ones that I haven't done or don't have someone close to me that has done it, but I'll go through all those options with you just to give you an overview of those tests as well, if they might suit you. And Caroline will be going over people that have exemptions from English. She didn't write an English test herself, so she'll be going through with you if you don't have to write an English test, if you qualify for an exemption for the English test. So that's also an interesting topic, as a lot of countries actually are exempt from the English test. But
unfortunately South Africa is not.
Yes,
I know we've had many friends that tried to go through the loopholes and stuff, and unfortunately South Africans have to write an English test.
You just can't get around it. I know a lot of people have commented as well on the page and on Instagram saying, I'm from South Africa. Do I have to do the English test? I studied here, I studied there. I'm from Cape Town. All my schooling is in English.
Yeah.
It doesn't specify. It's very vague on some of the websites that whether you have to do it or not. The answer is you have to do it.
Yeah. Myself and Sasha, we have a mutual friend, and she went through the whole trying to go through the loophole, and she eventually had to realize that she had to write the English tests.
Yeah.
And she did.
It's annoying, but
it's part of the process.
It's part of the process, part of the learning curve.
Look back on it and laugh at it and smile.
Yep. So we hope this helped you. Hope we gave you a little bit more insight into the two different types and our experiences and a bit of the pros and cons, and you can find out what maybe would suit your type of English. And look out for the rest of this series where we're speaking about the English test. There'll be more parts to this podcast, like I mentioned before. So thank you so much for listening. And please don't forget to find us on social media. Find us at Code U Australia on Instagram and Facebook. And also we have a YouTube channel, Code U Australia, where we post videos that might not actually make it onto our Facebook and Instagram. So make sure you check those out and subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. Thanks so much, Brendan.
Thanks very much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you. And we'll see you guys in the next few parts of the English testing podcasts.
Cool.
Thanks for listening.